To my right is the ASUS TUF Gaming VG259QM. And a few months ago, I made a comparison with the ASUS VG259QM, which is the 27-inch version, and compared it to other monitors, including my BenQ Zowie XL2540. If you watched that video, you'd remember that I wasn't too impressed with the 27-inch model when compared to my Zowie. However, that's changed with this. The VG259QM is an absolute gaming beast and does a much better job than its 27-inch counterpart. Whether it's because of the panel that this monitor has or because my tests are much better now than they were in that video, I have no clue, though I'll be honest, it was probably my testing. However, all of that is not to say that this monitor is perfect, because it's not. It definitely needs some refinement here and there, but not in the way that you would expect. For example, I'm super critical of OSDs, or on-screen displays, because this is the one thing that you constantly have to mess around with if you're constantly switching tasks, such as going from gaming to content consumption. The OSD itself is not bad, things are somewhat logically laid out, but when you want to switch profiles, that's when I get annoyed. You can set two shortcuts to some of the OSD's functions, including a way to easily switch profiles, but just like the 27-inch model, you can't access any of the profiles you've made through the shortcut. To do that, you would have to open the full OSD, then go down to the My Favorite tab, then select Customize Setting, then select the setting you saved your profile on, and then load it. It just feels so primitive. And yes, that is such a first world problem, but a problem is a problem, and people would have complained if I didn't mention it because pretty much every other reputable manufacturer does a better job in this aspect than ASUS. However, that's about where the negatives end for this monitor, because everything else ranged from good to holy crap. Let's start with the holy crap. The VG259QM offers a 1 millisecond gray to gray response time with overdrive and offers 6 total levels ranging from 0 to 100. The UFO you're looking at is moving at 3840 pixels per second, which is only about half as fast as flicking, but still extremely fast and definitely fast enough to give you a good idea on how well it'll perform in fast motion situations. With the overdrive set to 0, you already get super fantastic performance. Like, this is probably the best I've ever seen in a monitor ever, at least for now. To give you some perspective, here's what the Alienware AW2720HF looks like on fast mode, and the Zowie XL2540 with its AMA set to high. Amazingly impressive results for the ASUS. Moving up to 20, it looks pretty much the same. Setting it to 40, however, is when we start to see some improvements. It's not immediately obvious, but the legs on the UFO are slightly less visible. So it's a small improvement, but an improvement nonetheless. Setting it to 60 reverts those improvements back to what it looked like originally, and setting it to 80 is when we start to see some corona artifacts, commonly referred to as inverse ghosting or overshoot, which is this chromatic ghost looking effect. For those of you who are not familiar with why this happens, when you apply a higher level of overdrive to a monitor, you're applying more voltage to the pixels. When you apply too much, the pixels are changing colors too fast, making it go beyond the color it's supposed to be. This is why it's called inverse ghosting, because it's the opposite of ghosting, which is just a trail of slow pixel response. Now, if that's 80, how does this monitor look at 100? Well, as you probably guessed, it looks horrible because we're applying way too much voltage. Now, usually the higher refresh rate you go, the less motion blur there is, and this monitor does overclock to 280 Hz. However, the results look the same, so I won't bore you with the same pictures. This monitor also offers an ELMB function, or extreme low motion blur, but surprisingly there are more negatives than positives. Usually ELMB gives you much better results, but because it already looks amazing from the get-go, I guess that's not really possible here. It ends up looking worse. Not only that, but other side effects of ELMB include monitors using the backlight strobing technique to try to give less motion blur, and some users are sensitive and bothered by strobing. On top of that, another typical thing of ELMB is that it has a monitor's peak brightness of 415 nits to 207 nits. Now, 207 nits is not bad, it's not like you can't see anything. But when you have that along with backlight strobing and worse ghosting performance, it's a no-brainer just leaving ELMB off and using 40 overdrive. Another thing that's good is the black equalizer, or the black boost as they call it. Now, you can't just turn on the black boost and expect good results. No, no, no. Because certain profiles will give better results than others. When you turn the monitor on for the first time, the default profile is the racing profile, which seems to be the best for general daily use, but we'll get to that. On racing mode, if you crank up the black boost from off to its highest setting, which is 3, the improvement isn't drastic enough to where I'd be confident that I'd be able to see everybody hiding in dark spots. But what does make me feel more confident is switching from your racing profile, or game visual as they call it, and moving to either FPS or RTS RPG. This will do some funky stuff to your colors, but makes it much easier to see in darker spots. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to competitive shooters, I prefer being able to see people over the weird tint of a color. Now, some of you that are familiar with this monitor may have noticed that I didn't mention the dynamic adjustment. While it is true that there's a higher level that'll give better results, and by quite a bit, it turns on the edge-lit local dimming, which have huge zones. You can even see it on the HUD on the corners of the screen. If we turn off dynamic adjustment, we have a uniform screen. If we turn it on, it gets darker around the HUD because of those huge zones. These zones constantly turning on and off are not only annoying and distracting, but could also confuse you for an enemy if there's a zone switching on and off in your periphery. In a game like Escape from Tarkov, it could throw you off and possibly make you paranoid, wondering where those local dimming zones went hiding. Other than that though, the black boost is definitely respectable, and when it comes to competitive esports titles such as CSGO and Rainbow Six Siege, it works fine. Speaking of fine, the panel this monitor uses, it's fine. It's 24.5 inches, which is great for competitive titles since you're able to easily look at the corners for HUD information without drifting your eyes away from the center too much, especially when compared to a 27-inch display. It's a 1080p display, giving a total pixel density of 89 pixels per inch, making it relatively hard to pixel peep compared to its 27-inch big brother, and it covers a decent amount of the color spectrum with 96% of the sRGB color space. While it's not 99% like ASUS advertises, the difference between 96 and 99 is not discernible, at least to my eye. It also covers 70% of Adobe RGB, so if you're a professional photo editor, this is not ideal. However, if you're an amateur video editor, its 78% coverage of the DCI-P3 color space is usable. Color accuracy is a different story though. The pre-calibrated color accuracy of this monitor is absolutely horrible with a delta E of 4.42, which, for those that are not familiar, the closer you are to 0, the more color accurate your display is. The further away, the less accurate, with anything 4 or 5 just being pretty bad. So if you're buying this monitor and you're not going to get it professionally calibrated, get ready for some mathematically bad color reproduction. The reason why I say it's mathematically bad is because while it is true that 4.42 is not good, right out of the box it looked totally fine and better than my Zowie's calibrated display, which gave a delta E of 1.41. Though that could be because this is an IPS display, which means that there's less angle discoloration even if you're viewing the monitor from straight on. Speaking of, being that this is an IPS display, viewing angles are as great as we would expect them to be. Great all around. Back to the numbers though, when calibrated, I was actually surprised at how bad it still did, especially for an IPS display. When calibrated, we managed to only get down to a delta E of 2.41. I tried absolutely everything to get this lower. Different preset color profiles, different contrasts, etc. This seems to be as good as it gets. But take that with a grain of salt. I'm still waiting for RTinks to post their results. Now, while I was expecting it to be better, I don't want to give off the impression that it's bad because it's not. Just like I mentioned when it was uncalibrated, it looks perfectly fine in my eyes, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and not everyone will agree, though I'm sure most will. As I mentioned earlier, this monitor has a peak brightness of 415 nits, meaning that it's bright enough to have VESA's HDR 400 certification, and it does. But as I and many others say, you want at least 1000 nits for HDR. Taking a look at the SDR versus HDR video, the HDR overexposes everything like crazy even after adjusting it through Windows. Results on camera will always look somewhat different than what I'm actually seeing, but HDR on this monitor just isn't that great. What is great, relatively speaking, is the contrast. ASUS advertises this to have a contrast ratio of 1000:1, and to my surprise, it was exactly 1000:1. Not that that's a super good contrast ratio or anything, because it's really not that impressive. But I'm used to manufacturers just saying they have a 1000:1 contrast ratio and delivering only 80% of that or even 50% of that in the case of the HP Omen X I recently reviewed. Anyway, this means that you'll have deep blacks as well as visually pleasing highlights in bright areas of a scene. Now that we got all the big stuff out the way, let's move on to the smaller and less important stuff. When you look at this monitor, you immediately realize where ASUS decided to put their resources. Spoiler alert, it's the display. The build and design of this monitor isn't eye-catching or special. It's all black with the exception of the branding in the rear, as well as a red ring around the stand. The monitor is all plastic, though decent quality plastic. It doesn't feel cheap. The top and side bezels are pretty thin at 1/4 of an inch thick, with the chin being slightly thicker at 1/2 inch thick. ASUS did try to flare the monitor up a bit with some circuit-like designs on the base of the stand and some spaceship body panel-like designs on the rear of the monitor, but you're not staring at the back of the monitor most of the time. The monitor includes a decent assortment of I/O, or input-output, including one DisplayPort 1.2 and two HDMI 2.0 ports. You also get a headphone jack, a Kensington lock, and a single USB Type-A port, which is used for service only. Sorry guys, if you want to plug stuff in and you're running out of space on your PC, you're just gonna have to buy a USB hub. There is, however, a good amount of small details that makes daily use with this monitor better. For example, it has a wire routing hole on the bottom of the stand, making wires look less messy. And there's also a plate on the back of the monitor stand so you don't see any of the wires behind the monitor. It has 100 by 100 VESA matting support, allowing you to mount this to a monitor arm or stand. It weighs 11.2 pounds, which is relatively light for the class of monitors that it's in, making it easy to carry around even though it doesn't have a carrying handle. The display has a matte finish with great anti-glare properties, so you don't have any issues with your ceiling light or other reflections unless you have a bright flashlight pointing at it directly. Then we have you guys smashing the like button for the YouTube algorithm if you haven't done so already. And lastly, it has -5 degrees to +33 degrees of tilt, 130 millimeters of height. It also has 90 degrees of swivel and 90 degrees of pivot. And if you forgot how many degrees you can twist and turn this thing, it's printed on the side of the stand. Now let's revisit the OSD, because even though I did rag on it in the beginning, it's not all bad. There are still things I like here and there. For example, you can add a crosshair to the center of your screen if what you're playing has no HUD. You can set a timer up to 90 minutes, which will always display on the top left of the monitor. And you can display an FPS counter on the top right, which will show either only the FPS or have a full graph that shows any fluctuations. That's really cool. However, that's not even the coolest thing. One thing that always sticks out to me on ASUS monitors is the sniper mode. Sniper mode allows you to zoom in to the center of your screen as well as forcing you to choose a red or green dot as a crosshair. This makes it super easy to see enemies that are far away in games with huge maps, such as any Battlefield game, Squad, Escape from Tarkov, etc. If you're an Escape from Tarkov player, this feature is invaluable, especially if you're trying to see if you killed someone and didn't bring a sight with a high enough zoom. Then there's the adaptive sync. This monitor has G-Sync compatibility. If you're using a DisplayPort cable, VRR or variable refresh rate will work from 48 Hz to 280 Hz. And if you're using an HDMI cable, first of all, why are you? Second, it supports 48 Hz to 240 Hz. So not 280 Hz like the DisplayPort will. And while we're talking about 280 Hz, how is 280 Hz? Can I notice a difference from 240 Hz? Did it help me play any better? I'm not even gonna pretend like I noticed anything because I didn't. When you go from 60 Hz to 144 Hz, that's a huge jump. And even going from 144 Hz to 240 is still very noticeable. At this point, I cringe when I use a 144 Hz display. But going from 240 to 280, that's when we start to see some diminishing returns. I won't say that it didn't help me though, because based on my performance, I did end up being slightly better with flick shots, but it was so slight that it either could have been placebo effect or I was just having a really good day. But hey, I'll never say no to more frames. Talking to you ASUS, waiting for that 360 Hz. So then, what's my verdict on the VG259QM? Should you avoid it? Should you consider it? Should you shortlist it? Or should you just go right ahead and buy it? Well, at a price point of $330, if you don't mind constantly fiddling around with the OSD buttons to switch profiles, because it does drive some people nuts, then I think you should just go right ahead and buy it. The performance this thing offers is not only insane for its price, but some of the best I've ever seen in general. Now, I have no clue if this monitor is the best because this is only my 9th monitor I've ever reviewed, and there are more to come, but as it stands right now, it's an absolute monster of a performer, and it won't kill your wallet. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please smash the like button, comment, subscribe, you know the drill. Also, as an Amazon associate, I earn from qualifying purchases, so if you guys want to buy this monitor or any monitor, click on the Amazon link in the description below. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm always trying new ways of presenting things to make it more interesting for you to stick around as long as possible, but still making it enjoyable for me. Other than that, have a great day, every day. Peace. Woohoo!